Welcome to Wellness for Entrepreneurs, where we have meaningful conversations with founders. This podcast is about exploring, educating, and empowering entrepreneurs on maintaining wellness in their entrepreneurial journey. My name is Matebe Jobo, and I am an entrepreneurship investor, scholar, and evangelist. I am your host. Very little is known about the first form of trade and entrepreneurship in Africa, but in today's world, we know that sub-Saharan Africa has one of the lowest GDPs per capita in the world, and that it has been falling since 2014. This is Wellness for Entrepreneurs, episode 14. In this episode, we talk to Dr. Charles Sinkala, who is an international political analyst and lawyer by background, on the history and the future of entrepreneurship in Africa. Dr. Charles Sinkala is a highly accomplished lawyer and the president of Africa 55 States. He's a lecturer in political science, economics, and other related subjects. He's a former member of parliament in Zambia and the 2021 presidential candidate in Zambia. Africa 55 States is an advocacy organization that drives economic and political emancipation on the African continent. Dr. Sinkala, welcome to the Wellness for Entrepreneurs podcast. It is an honor to have you on this episode.
The pleasure is mine. Thank you for having me.
All right, let's get right into it. In the 1980s, almost all African countries had a GDP per capita that was higher than China. Guinea-Bissau and Uganda were the only two countries that had a GDP per capita that was lower than China. Fast forward to 2016. China's GDP per capita grew by 41 times, overtaking all African countries. For a long time, the story of Africa has been that of constant restraint, constraint, poverty, and low GDP per capita. Let us try to understand this genesis. Do we have a sense of the earliest form of trade in Africa, in as far as it relates to the history books?
Yes, thank you very much. It is actually a sad situation that we are recording those statistics in terms of the per capita and the GDP performance over the last 60 years. The problem we have in Africa, which we continues to remain in denial, is the fact that many countries believed in the liberation movements. And I think most countries, they realize that they have arrived and there's no more work, because their main opponent was the colonial and the pre-colonial and colonial situation. So these are the problems. But talking about entrepreneurship, if you follow the literature which has been published, you won't get so much information, as it is more technical, and it talks about the structure. It talks about the forces around the entrepreneurship. But entrepreneurship, it's simply an exchange by two parties, either an organization or an individual, by trying to exchange something that of value. You must remember very well that entrepreneurship has been ever from the creation, as opposed of what has been stipulated in the Wikipedia and the reliable sources we have in our literatures. Entrepreneurship started as early as the Stone Age, the hunters, where there were those who were hunting for animals and those who were tilling the land, to produce some other types of food stuff. So there was an exchange. So they could bring the animal meat products, to exchange for either vegetables, or they exchange with things like tools. That's entrepreneurship, in simple terms.
Yeah, I like that when you say entrepreneurship is an exchange of value, simply put. And to be quite honest, we know that history is written by the most powerful country at the time. And we know that history records that entrepreneurship was centered around the West, mainly after the fall of Rome in the 500s. And so you clearly see that in the history books, there is no record of the ethos of entrepreneurship on the African continent, and that Rather we see entrepreneurship as ancient Rome sourcing material from North Africa, and not necessarily that Africa itself was an entrepreneurial continent. So actually it makes me wonder, what could have been our default ethos or mindset as Africans on the continent at the time? Given that a lot of what was pervasive at the time was mainly conquering of countries in order to gain wealth. In general, what we know is that the medieval era really shunned the activity of commerce per se, but it looked at, those that were wealthy in society and were well established were those that owned land, for example. So when we think about the African context, what mindset do we think even existed in the Stone Age, in ancient Rome, and the medieval era?
The mindset which existed before, it was an individual mindset where we had subsistence type of trading, subsistence farming or subsistence entrepreneurship, exchange where a family only does for his own family or her family, until where only certain people or individuals were meant to actually cultivate or hunt. For Africa at that time, it was trading with the Romans, the Europeans, though they had no specific territories, they could just come, and they trade in whatever which they wanted, and they perfect it in either in Europe or America or elsewhere. If you talk about the mechanical era of Society One, which started in Ethiopia, through these explorers who came to preach the religion and the other aspects, what they call civilization, they came to actually maintain, in the sense that they had better knowledge than the Africans, the way they were doing the things. So slowly African leaders decided to do importation, and that's how Africa has been developed to be a consumer territory or market, of consumption rather than the production, as it started in the Society One and the Industrial One.
That's very, very interesting. So the picture you're painting is one of where Africa was a producer in its own right, and we assume it was mainly agricultural products, grain, oils, those sort of products. The phenomenon of colonialism and slavery then started to shift the mindsets of Africa as a producer to Africa as a consumer. So we know that Europe grew its economy using slavery, essentially, and colonialism. But, the mindsets that existed then of Africa as a producer then absolutely also shifted with that. But I want us to take it to today, having highlighted those shifts that occurred, that entrepreneurship and trade in Africa still remains pretty much informal. We still remain pretty much a consumer society. A few years even after slavery and colonialism, and even back to the advent of independence. What do you think still causes this pervasive type of mindset even in today's world?
Yeah, but I would like to take you to the erstwhile comment you just commented, and I needed to add that it is very important to understand that pre-colonial times, Africa was trading with the world. Africa was doing very well, not only foodstuffs, but also minerals. You must remember that the Stone Age and the Steel Age started from Africa. My country, Zambia, was one of the places they discovered the deposits of the Homo habilis, those who started cobalt mining and all those type of things. So we can't pretend to know that everything was construed by the colonial powers or the agenda by the colonial masters or colonial countries. But we must understand that before colonialism and slavery, there was a system of Africa. But to the later point of your comment, of why we haven't evolved, it's a matter of a question But us as Africans, we like being in comfort zone because poverty and systems are passed on. If your father was a taxi driver, you remain a taxi driver. There is very little evolution and expansion in terms of doing our systems of trading or our system of doing business. I can give you an example. I visited my friend on the 60th birthday in Zwelithini in KwaZulu Natal, and we arrived early hours in Ulundi there. One of my entourage, decided that we must buy mangwenya, from the street and tea, for breakfast, because we could not find KFC or any other usual McDonald's we eat here in Santon. So this store, of a woman, had so much customers lining up outside. They could not anticipate that the number of customers she's going to receive during the particular time will be 30. Can she prepare the dough and the magwenyas, which can, be equitable to serve those people fresh at that early hours of the morning at 6 a.m. in the morning? And she lived like that. And to her, it was normal. Like I'm saying, we think that we have arrived. We do not think of how well can we improve. So if that lady, can have the knowledge, that can be thinking of expansion, that having now 30 customers outside. Can I have a waiting place? Can I employ one or two people, to help me to facilitate the production so that I can maximize on my profit? And entrepreneurship is somebody whom you see by the corner store of your shop in their Ikasi or wherever you might be, whether in town or in the township, selling cigarettes and sweets. That person has been there for many years. It does not go up, it does not go down, it keeps on the same wavelength, because he knows that when he buys a packet of cigarettes of 100, a packet of sweets of 100, he knows how much he's supposed to sell. He knows how much he's supposed to eat as a profit. He knows that he must, the budget that he must go back and order some more sweets. So that's entrepreneurship. And this is the teachings that we have to instigate and teach in schools at an early age.
Yeah, but I like the example you made about the lady or the granny that, you went to KZN and you realized that this granny could not necessarily have anticipated that at that particular time there would be activity and she would need to create extra capacity. So that actually makes me think about our culture and thought patterns that we have. So culture as a collectivist on a national level, as well as individual thought patterns, because that frames the outcomes of entrepreneurship quite significantly. So in episode 5, I applied Hofstede's framework on national culture to South Africa, and essentially that framework talks about 6 dimensions of national culture, which are power distance, uncertainty avoidance, individualism versus a collectivist society, a masculine society versus a feminine one, and having a long-term versus a short-term orientation, and lastly, indulgence and restraint. So these typically shape pervasive thought patterns in society and actually even impact the outcomes of entrepreneurship. So the point you're making around, somebody has been running one business for so long, it hasn't gone up, it hasn't gone down. But, at the same time, we look at that person and we say that is a small business owner versus an entrepreneur, because the whole art or the outcome of entrepreneurship is around scaling businesses and growing businesses. If we look around businesses like Google and Facebook, who were not necessarily around 20 years ago, and these are now global businesses that we use in our day-to-day lives. So it just makes me wonder, do we have a culture of growing and scaling businesses in Africa? Or it is that we are very comfortable with running a Magwinya business day in, day out, and for as long as it is survivalist, then that's okay. Where are we as a continent, as a society? How do we see these cultural and thought patterns influencing the scalability of our businesses?
Yeah, you know, when you talk about the scalabilities of the businesses, it's where now we invite the colonialism, the agenda of 1884, 1885 Berlin Conference. You know, that there was an agenda that they turn Africa, instead of being a producing continent, to a consumer continent due to the large space and the numbers. So these all aspects of what has been happening now, it has been engineered. You know, it is there, the facts are there, and things are happening in our eyes. And we can see that this Berlin conference, where Africa was never invited, you know, it has transformed itself, changing names, and now we see it's a G7, you know, where Africa does not have a permanent seat. Even if African leaders, they are invited to go and attend that meeting, they are only merely invited to take a photo shoot outside the conference. But once the meeting starts, they are not invited. That's where they decide that they create systems in terms of pricing, like the London Metal Exchange, you know, where the copper and the platinum from Zambia, and the diamond from South Africa, and the diamond from Angola, and many other minerals within the African continent, their prices are decided from London. So once you understand the dynamics of how now the systems have evolved, by making an African person to depend on aid is assistance in distress. So Africa, it has been made to believe that we are distressed all the time. And the creation of the NGOs, non-government organization, and charity organization, which has been in Africa for a very long time, has come to make our mindset corrupted to understand that we need aid. In fact, if you listen to the mainstream media, you realize that across Africa, most presidents, they go out of the continent to go and beg for money for the National Prosecuting Authority, or to pay salaries, or to build a school. They go beg, meanwhile they have left the minerals there. Switzerland is an example where there's no copper there, where there's no mining there, but a company called Granico bought the Zambian mines there. You know, with what they do is they write invoices and orders, so that the money and the copper is produced in Zambia and exported wherever they want to be, and they just receive the money. So that is a tragedy of us as Africans, where we have lost our self-esteem. And when you look at the Jesus industry, which came, for people to believe now in more beyond the culture boundaries and the religion, where the Bible has been translated many times, to suit the environment. And through that type of translation, or that process rather, this devil has taken the time to change some of the books so that they remove that entrepreneurship of independence of an individual, besides being a collective, but as an individual. You must remember, we do not exist as collective in society. Yes, we can say we are Africans, we are Ubuntu, we are united, but at the end of the day, or at the end of the night, or at the end of the evening, we see ourselves driving alone in the car from a meeting. You are driving alone in the car, you are going home, you have to prepare food for you to eat and find where to sleep. So that's how society is. So this individualism has never been understood, because we've been corrupted. That's why we need to decolonize our mindset. As last time I checked, the standard of a person, a man in Bible, it has been classified is a mindset. So our mindset culture, it has to be it has to relearn what we've been taught. You must remember, on platforms I've spoken again, and I'm not shy to talk to you, that a human being is brought on earth without nothing. You do not know how to drive a car. You do not know how to speak. You do not know how to walk. You do not know how to talk to people. You do not know how to do anything. So it is the knowledge that we accumulate, is the knowledge that we pump into our children, is the knowledge that we give, or we format the disk of our children. Like when you buy a computer, laptop for the first time, You know, you need to buy the software, the Microsoft and the antivirus and whatever for you to make sure that the computer performs the way it's supposed to perform. So if the knowledge we put into our children in schools is about photosynthesis, you know, it's about trigonometry, difficult mathematics, about how Jesus, you know, and all those type of things, and without even realizing that the Roman Catholics, you know, they removed some books, found some 14 books in the Bible without even having a commission on this Bible industry, regulating it properly. Look what has happened in South Africa regarding the Bushiri story, which is trending now for some few days now. You know, how Bushiri captured the people of South Africa by buying water, so-called holy water, that once they buy that holy water, when they go home, they will have opportunities, they will have love affair, they will have employment, they will have a lot of things. So when I talk about the Jesus industry, I'm not saying I'm not a Christian, but I'm talking about the industry that has been overtaken. And this has consumed people to believe more in miracles than believing in themselves. So that Jabulani who's selling sweets there by the corner is praying all the time to God that God must give him something, without him thinking that through working in that spaza shop at the corner there can make him to blossom into a Pick and Pay franchise. And that franchise will have no boundaries. It can even employ the Americans, it can even employ the Zambians, it can even employ anybody in the world. There is no standard of operation in terms of business. We've seen how multinational businesses has grown. Most of them, even the innovation or creativity has been growing from garages. Mike Zuckerberg as well, Facebook from the garage, Apple from the garage, many of these. So it's the knowledge that we have pumped into these children. In fact, we shouldn't be surprised that our children are behaving like this, because it's a knowledge which we've been putting. And when you talk about China in your preamble of this interaction, you mentioned that China was nobody, you know, 60, 70 years ago, you know, and their GDP was actually less than any country in Africa. Zambia was even better off. South Africa was even better off than China. But Chairman Mao decided, what is the problem in China? And the overpopulation in China was a burden for the country. So what they decided, one, was to maintain the population by limiting the number of children a family should produce to 2. You know, and once they did that, then they started having a steady population growth. But when you compare on the note of the children population control, when you look at Africa and the Jesus industry, where it says subdue the world and multiply, you have our fathers and the children being born like my family. I'm not saying anything bad to my father and my mother, but we are 7 in the family. Did my father afford? Yes, he did, but we struggled to even find food on the table. But I'm not talking about the food on the table or my parents as the center of this conversation. But my point, what I'm trying to explain to the people who are listening to this interview, is that the culture from China 60 years ago, Chairman Ma, he gave each and every Chinese person to have a black book. This black book is a turnaround time on how everybody is supposed to participate to decolonize their mindset, that they must forget about the Western culture. You know, China also was colonized. You know, it is surprisingly that people, they do not talk about it. China was not blessed as an angel from God that they become how they are now. China was nothing. China was the same as Japan, which was bombed to ashes. But very quickly, as I conclude on this point, China decided that forget about the outside the technology. You know, we shall use our own indigenous technology. That's how they started building industries. And in China, there's no patent that if you design a suit in this is your patent, like how it is in America. They will sue you to do the same iPhone in United States of America. In China, you can manufacture the same Apple. You can see how the black market now is flooded with fake Apple. They mass produce, and you know, that's how the culture was changed. So a change of culture in Africa, it is what is needed for that person, individual is selling the mango and you're there. Am I a poor person? And this Jesus industry, which has talked about once you die, in heaven, you're gonna live happily. You know, even there's some pictures in heaven where there's fruits everywhere. People are smiling. That has been populated to damage the mindset of the people. You know, the heaven is on earth. Once we are alive, now we are living. This is heaven. That's why your family has to enjoy. When you die, your body is decomposed into the soil, into the mud, into whatever where you will be. Your soul will leave you. So the understanding of the humankind and the connection with religion and the culture change, you know, these are the aspects that has to be taught in our schools on the early childhood, to pump knowledge and sense, so that they will attain what I attained only 10 years ago. You know, I attained the wisdom, I attained the vision of myself beyond what is written into the books or the literature or what I was taught at school. So this is how I value and I see life. You know, you need to ask questions. Something what I've been told that, you know, Africa is poor. When I look around, I see minerals, trucks of copper getting out of my country, Zambia, going outside, and I see Europe is being developed. You know, so these are the issues that we have to decolonize the mindset of our people, because the standard of ourselves is the mindset. The Europe, the United States, they are very much worried if Africa starts thinking.
Yeah. No, look, I think the points you're mentioning around, firstly, the history of our mindset from a colonial perspective, you know, and you mentioned the Jesus industry. I mean, it's connected in the sense that we know that colonialists came here and, you know, spreaded religion, and that's how they used that. Not to say that we should not believe in Jesus. And the point you're making around Bushiri, you know, who's simply able to say, if you use water, you know, all your problems will go away. And I think that's a pervasive mindset that comes with that. But I'm still at the point where, you know, as Africans, most of us have achieved independence. And I think you mentioned it earlier that, you know, the liberation movements have, you know, their job is done. They no longer have anything else to offer in that sense. You can see that type of thinking when you look at countries like Zimbabwe, for example, where you start a business. If it is successful, for some reason, the law changes overnight and it now belongs to the government. You know, so stuff like that in terms of political instability, corruption, you know, the non-pervasiveness of the rule of law, working systems, all of that does contribute to, you know, the culture that we see on the ground. And I think we shouldn't forget that component, because I think, you know, it's a leadership conversation at the same time, as well as an individual conversation, you know, from entrepreneurs and how we see business. So, for example, in South Africa, there's a law around this law essentially wants to encourage entrepreneurship. But what we do find is that even with laws like this, you know, you have this type of thinking around entitlement, or even non-productive type of entrepreneurial activities that don't necessarily create value. So at the same time, you know, we look at a broad range of factors that are around political instability, lack of rule of law, inconsistencies on how we apply legislation, but also on the ground, how entrepreneurs themselves or small business owners think about how they should be positioning themselves to do business. So they don't necessarily position themselves as creating value per se, but it is more about what I can take out. I mean, we've seen this movie happen right now during COVID-19, where you've got PPEs and that scandal where, you know, we're in a moment of crisis, but you still have people that would rather extract value than create value. So how do we, on the one hand, we cannot continue to blame, you know, slavery and the colonists. We simply cannot continue to do that, because we are here today, we are here right now, and we are now looking at 2050, and we're going to be half the world's population. But you're quite correct. On the one hand, you've got a system that wants to keep you as consumers, particularly of digital technologies. But at the same time, how does Africa emancipate itself? How does it look at its issues and deal with those issues realistically, without blaming anybody else from outside, and without creating an environment where we don't self-reflect and introspect on what is actually required for us to move forward?
Yes, blaming, it's a game that I like. Many people, they are in denial because they would like to blame somebody for their failures. But philosophers have said, and I am a philosopher, that blaming somebody, it's a want of education. Blaming yourself, it's a sign that education is in progress. Blaming neither yourself nor anybody else, it is a sign that education is complete. Yes, you mentioned about we cannot use the past credentials of apartheid and colonialism, to dictate on our current situation, which is very right. We cannot also depend and continue to blame government. If you listen to President Ronald Reagan in 1981, October on the 30th, he addressed the Americans and said, do not think or anticipate that the government will help you. The government is a problem. So from 1980s, America has looked away from the benefits of the government sponsorship. America started creating their own industries in all this, the dynamics of society, in the movie industries, in the sport industries, in whatever you can think of. America, there's all those industries that one celebrity fighting in a boxing match, Mayweather, will make about $400 million in about 30 minutes, fight, and many others, celebrities who are in movie industries as well. If you look at their income, not only in the movie industries, but look at the music industries, Jay-Z and all those whom Africans, children and people, even adults, they pray so much that they listen to them all the time, and they can't listen to our own musicians. They make so much money. And if you look at those standards and the dynamics that one individual making just in 30 minutes, $400 million, and if there are 10 of them, it's already a lot of money that our calculators or our politicians in Africa won't even pronounce if they have to be specific about the figures and the digits and the decimals where they are. But that is not my point to really address the politicians in Africa in terms of their accuracy in pronouncing numbers. But my point, what I'm trying to say is the blaming of others has been a problem. What you as an individual can you do? Innovation, creativity, what can you create? In fact, life is a mimicry. Whatever the difficulties you are going through your squatter camp, through your suburbs, through your workplace, whatever difficulties you have in there, if you turn the page the other way around and use those as guidelines of your difficulties of not having a car, not having a cell phone, not having a house, you turn them around and say, how can I have a house? How can I have a cell phone? How can I have a company? That would be the beginning of your mind start thinking independently. So America now, it's a superpower because their GDP per capita is way beyond 14,000 per citizen. And in fact, last time I checked, Americans, they've invested into citizens. One citizen in America is equivalent to $700,000. And the way they do it is like the Scandinavian countries, Netherlands, Finland, Switzerland, and all those rich countries up there, where they invest into citizens. Once you invest into the citizens' education by pumping the good knowledge into them, eventually there will be entrepreneurs, there will be employees. And when you talk about an entrepreneur, you talk about an employee, all these have got one thing which is in common, which is tax for the government. An employee pays 30% tax, and besides that, pay as you earn. Also in companies, they will pay income tax, on companies, which is in excess of 40-60% as well. So why does the government does not invest to give a free education, free formatting of this child who is born? New Zealand and Sweden, education is for free. Maybe tertiary, where now you can fend for yourselves, but they know from the early childhood, they know they are pumping in good knowledge into you, that one day you become a contributor, a citizen who will be contributing to the government, not a liability of a country like what has been happening in Africa. In fact, talking about human capital, you realize that Africa gives away the knowledge of those who are educated. The doctors are educated. I'm one of them who's been given away. I'm not in my country now, although I shouldn't be on the center of the topic because I'm planning to go back and run as president in my country. But what I'm saying, the protection of human capital has to be protected within the countries. Even if you see that the doctors, the lawyers, the professionals, the innovators, those who create things are trying, even the sportsmen, before a sportsman can be taken away from the country, the government must protect that human capital to remain in the country and in the continent, to be specific. So, but when you talk about America, America is not made of the Zulus or the Ndeveles or the Bembas or whatever. America is a country, the only country I'm aware of in the world that has got the whole population, ethnicity, and the tribes in the whole world. In fact, at one stage, I was sitting in New York having coffee with one of the owners of the coffee shop at Times Square. He mentioned that, Charles, I'm a Jew, and you know that in America, America has the highest population of Jews, in the world. In fact, Israel is the population of 2, 3, 4 million is nothing. The number of Jews in America, if they see somebody that has got value, this person has got value either in sport, innovation. Many of the African scholars who's been very good has been picked. That's why you see that there's embassies of these countries in our African continents. American embassy, they invest so much in the embassies to make sure that they identify the talent, they identify technology, they identify so many things that can benefit their country. If you see their embassy there in Santon, in Rivonia and Catherine Street, you see that this is real investment of an embassy. You go to Pretoria in Hatfield, there you see that the embassy of the United States is a big, huge investment. They know what is the value of what they are taking from South Africa, But if you look at our embassies of African countries outside Africa, even if you go to one of the embassies, I think was a Congolese embassy or consulate I saw in Johannesburg or Pretoria, you laugh. It is just a house that they started renting there. But it's not a laughable matter, but it's something that we have to take very seriously. That's why you find that Africa has been left with idiots. I'm not insulting the Africans, but many people who are supposed to be educated and remain in Africa, they are gone, they are overtaken, they are taken somewhere else without the political will of trying to leave these people so that they develop the African continent. So the human resources is as more important as the minerals that we have. In fact, the brain is the most human resource that we can have as Africans. The more we start controlling on the importation or the exportation of human resources, the good people that we have, will stop the kakistocracy type of set. Kakistocracy, I know it's a difficult word. I always try to avoid these difficult words to use, but it's a government run by the least qualified citizens. So we need the more qualified people who can preside over our governance and give us that management leadership where they manage all the resources, they manage the people, and they do not conform or align themselves to the story that Africa is poor and that Africa should remain on aid and Africa should go for donation. In fact, at this point, if you may allow me the latitude to conclude my point, is that during apartheid, the apartheid system and the government had signed an agreement with the United States of America that the dollar and the rand relation must remain constant and must remain mutual. The reason why they did that, because if South Africa is selling millis, per ton for 100 rand, but in United States dollar value, 100 rand is nothing. You understand? A dollar is about 16 rand for $1, which means the United States of America, they are spending only $1, but they are getting 16 rands from it. You understand? So the apartheid government, they were very technical. If you check in the history, the rate of the dollar and the rand was almost 1-to-1, was very equivalent, was very competitive. There was not that much of a deficit or the gap, because they made up the terms that if United States of America wants to trade with the South Africa mutually, what they call mutual bilateral arrangement or bilateral trade, which is, they call it mutual. They like using the word mutual, but if you look up the word mutual, it means 50-50% types of relationship in trade. But what they said was the export of platinum from Rustenburg and the gold and the diamond from South Africa, the human resources that they're going to export to United States of America, is the value that they have. So if America is not going to guarantee that the rand and the dollar be equal, then they're not going to trade with America.
Yeah.
And the apartheid government, they actually attend that conversation into that meeting. And that's why America considered that without South Africa, South Africa is a great port. America wouldn't be doing. America makes a lot of money out of South Africa than South Africa making money out of it. So that was the strike of the balance that we need. In fact, even yourself, even as an entrepreneur, even anywhere else, when you are trading, the value of trade shouldn't be less than the one who's trading against you. It is a mutual trade. Where you go buy bread in ShopRite or Spar or in any other place, the value when you are giving that 16 rand to buy bread, whatever the cost it might be, it's a value that you are happy that the loaf of bread, when you're taking it home, when you put in the bread spread there, the butter and the margarine, or the peanut butter, people, they like it, even if peanut butter can be allergic to some people. But they will be enjoying that slice of bread because they paid for that value. So that is the exchange of trade and entrepreneurship in simple terms, which has to be amplified. So Africa must team up and decide not what they are fighting about, what we hear the fracas now, Malawi and South Africa regarding the Jesus industry prophet, but they must be meeting as African leaders themselves, not only when they're invited by the regional blocs like SADC, ECOWAS, or the Maghreb in North Africa, or the East ECOWAS in the West, or the United Nations, or any other European type of set or endeavor. But Africans should meet these investment forum where South Africa is hosting now. I heard the president mentioned that it will be hosted by South Africans. This is the platform where they set up the policy. You can trade, you can talk about improving of trade, but immediately when you do not put the rules of the game to be the same, it defies the purpose. The means to the purpose is defied completely, because what they have declared, the intercontinental Africa free trade area, is fine because it is intercontinental, but the free trade area between China and Lesotho cannot be free. How can China, with a GDP of that magnitude, be doing free trade with Lesotho with a GDP of about $2 billion, which is pocket change? One Jack Ma in China can pay the GDP annually to support the Lesotho there. That economy is very small. It's like in a boxing match. You know, they weigh you on the scale. They make sure that your physique and your weight is equivalent to the opponent they're going to put you in the ring. Otherwise, they can't put a Mayweather and they put Chamisa in the ring to fight a sport. It's not going to work. So that is the platform that African leaders, they show management qualities, not leadership. Leadership is based on accountability. It is based on ceremonial type of management. But we need managers, you know, who can preside over the economies or departments of our countries so that they decide on the rules of the game, so that when the rules of the game are the same, even if that person or that organization who has lost that game, you embrace that person who have lost, that you are the best man, you are the best woman.
Dr. Sinkala, it's been an absolute honor chatting to you. And I think I agree with you on one thing. We do have to overcome that very difficult word that you used, where leaders, the people leading the people, are not the lowest or lowly qualified or the least qualified leaders that we have in Africa. Yes, that very difficult word. So thank you so much. I do think the parting shot that I want to leave our listeners with here is human capital investment, you know, investing in your people. I think that and entrepreneurship was one of the key levers that China used, Hong Kong used, you know, as well as the policies you mentioned, creative imitation and so forth. Our strategy should be a full-on human capital investment type of program that allows us to emerge with the best entrepreneurs in the world, as well as the best leaders in the world.
Now, you can talk about the problems and how it is, but the most important thing that we have to talk about is now what? So what? How can we come out from here? You know, it is the most important thing, because now we are creating this alternative media to educate the people, because they are aware of what the problems are. We are aware how bad the African economies are managed. But how can we create an environment that the management of these economies, they can blossom? You know, I was part of the Agenda 2063 when it was conceived by former President of Zimbabwe, R.G. Mugabe, as the AU chairperson. You know, that Agenda 2063 hasn't been going anywhere because people are not participating in doing it. But what I'm trying to put is the people now must look away from the government responsibilities of living on grants. The investment in human capital, like what you've really mentioned, is the key to sustainable development and entrepreneurship in our countries and continent. And as well, let's guard what we have, our resources. Let's put a price on what we are producing. And a neighbor or somebody cannot tell us how much we should sell our vegetables in our backyard, our spinach that we like. So we must also understand that the political freedom was attained. Yes, we did attain, if you talk about South Africa in 1994. But what is the political freedom without economical freedom? Economical freedom will only be attained by the economies of the entrepreneurs. Economical freedom will never going to be attained by the political freedom. That's why politicians, you see, they cannot tell you about anything about economy, because their agenda, they had the only one agenda to liberate South Africa. And let's help the politicians by infusing the entrepreneurs to start creating themselves without depending on the government, with a bad government. On that note, thank you very much. We can have...
Thank you for listening to the Wellness for Entrepreneurs podcast, a space for meaningful conversations with founders. Please click on the link below to subscribe and follow us on our social media channels. Goodbye.